President Joe Biden is historically unpopular heading for his re-election bid. And what some Republicans are less likely to point out is that the likely nominee on the GOP side, Donald Trump, is as or more unpopular than Joe Biden heading into 2024. He's also facing multiple criminal indictments, which we've really never seen before in a presidential election cycle. So this will be really the first time this is played out in any American presidential cycle. So we don't really know the impact one way or another, but it's very, very wise to assume that it's probably going to hurt Donald Trump as he goes up against Joe Biden. So in today's video, we're going to talk about Donald Trump and Joe Biden's approval ratings, as well as what that would look like in a potential 2024 presidential election rematch. Because essentially, we have two of the most unpopular figures in American politics, probably going head to head once again. And we're going to talk about which one of these candidates is likely to prevail in that scenario. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So Joe Biden is unpopular. According to the FiveThirtyEight aggregate, as of right now, he's about 16 points underwater. 56% of Americans disapprove of Joe Biden. Just 40% of Americans approve. Now, if we look at where he was back during the midterm elections in early November, he was about 11 points underwater. So he's more unpopular now than he was back during the midterms. And of course, we all know how the midterms turned out. It turned out to be a pretty big disaster for the Republican Party, especially given the expectations that the polling was sort of giving us. You know, Republicans were supposed to win by a much larger margin than they ended up winning. They were supposed to win the House they only won it by just a couple, and they were supposed to flip back the Senate. They ended up actually net losing a Senate seat. So the Republicans did awful in the midterm elections when you really consider the national environment, what it should have been, and the popularity of Joe Biden. So, you know, 2022 sort of rewrote the conventional rules on midterm and even probably presidential elections, because of course the midterm election was different. Really, the whole Trump era itself has sort of been rewriting the rules of politics, because, you know, in 2018, while Republicans did lose the House by quite a bit, they actually picked up seats in the Senate. So, you know, the rules of politics are constantly changing, especially in this new era. And I think 2024, you're probably going to see a bit more of that. Because again, Joe Biden is 16 points underwater. He is the incumbent president, but by my estimation, he's the most likely to win in a Biden versus Trump scenario. If we take a look at Trump's favorability ratings, it's essentially identical to Joe Biden's. He's also 16 points below water. So the real question is, why would Republicans nominate Donald Trump again if he's so unpopular? And I think the fundamental reason for that is Republicans don't believe Donald Trump is that popular among the wider American electorate. Many Republicans sort of live in a bubble where, of course, they think everyone dislikes President Biden and that Donald Trump is widely seen as the favorite in re-election. But if we just take a look at some of the other candidates on this list, Ron DeSantis, for instance, he's only 12 points underwater. Not great numbers, but still slightly better than Donald Trump's. Nikki Haley is 6 points underwater. Again, not great, but still a lot better than Donald Trump and certainly better than Joe Biden. Tim Scott is 3 points above water. So out of all the candidates we looked at so far in the GOP field, he's the most popular. None of the others are really worth looking at. I mean, we can look at Vivek Ramaswamy. Oh, interestingly enough, he's actually 3 points above water. So, you know, some of these candidates are a lot more popular than Donald Trump. But of course, the Republican Party isn't based on which candidate is the most popular among the general electorate. It's which candidate they find to be the best choice against Joe Biden. And so far, a lot of people have been putting their hopes in Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been leading the pack by far and away compared to all of the other Republican contenders, even though he is so unpopular nationwide. So we're really pitting the two most unpopular American political figures against each other once again. And of course, in the last rematch, Joe Biden won that. This is when Donald Trump had incumbency advantage. This is when he was still in office. So, you know, he was the person in charge. Most people actually thought the economy was getting back on track, but it really didn't matter. At the end of the day, American voters saw Joe Biden as a more steady hand, a more stable figure, and they ousted Donald Trump and they elected Joe Biden. And I think in 2024, we're also going to see the election be a referendum on sustainability, on stability. And I think Donald Trump is seen as the chaos candidate. He's sort of the bomb thrower. That's reason really why he won the 2016 election, because many American voters were looking for a shakeup in the status quo. Hillary Clinton was the personification of the status quo. Donald Trump was the outsider. In 2016, Americans chose the outsider. In 2020, they chose the establishment. And in 2024, I think they're likely to pick the establishment again. Why? Donald Trump is in a much, much, much weaker position than he was in 2016 or 2020. In 2016, Donald Trump was a new commodity. He was saying things that no politician would really say in public. People were eating it up. He expanded the GOP coalition to white working class voters, a larger segment, I should say, of white working class voters, because, Republicans had been winning those for some time, but he expanded the tent. He shrunk the suburban tent. However, you saw a flight of suburban voters away from Donald Trump in 2016, but he still had enough suburban support to win places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. In 2020, that really wasn't the case. He actually lost ground with suburban voters, and he lost more ground with white working class voters. The only reason why Donald Trump really didn't fall through the floor is because he expanded the minority vote for the GOP very slightly in inner cities, and that's one of the reasons why, in places like Philadelphia, for instance, you actually saw a rightward trend when compared to 2016. Same with other cities across the country, because this is an area where New York especially, that was one of the places where you saw some of the biggest swings. LA County had big swings. But these counties don't matter because they're in states that are safe blue already going to the Democratic Party. But in 2024, I really don't see any way Donald Trump claws back these voters. Joe Biden is the incumbent. And, if 2022 was anything for the Republican Party, I think it was a wake-up call that their candidates and their policies had gone too far. The Trumpian candidates, the election denier types that really, are toxic to the suburbs and don't play well in a lot of these purple states. And then, of course, you have the abortion messaging, which was horrendous. It's something that Republicans really shouldn't be talking about on a national level, because that just gives fuel to the Democrats to use against them, because really Republicans' position on abortion is not popular. You could talk about the fact that, Democrats want late-term abortion or something like that, but that really isn't a viable argument at the end of the day. Voters don't buy that argument. We saw that in 2022. Many of the Republicans tried to toe that line. It was a disaster. They lost. They're going to lose again if they talk about abortion. The best thing you can do if you're a Republican is really not talk about the issue. You could say you're pro-life, but honestly, I think the issue, a smart thing Republicans could say, and honestly, I think the smart thing Republicans could say is that the issue is rested at this point. Roe v. Wade was overturned. That's it for abortion. So I don't expect Republicans to do that, though. I think they're probably going to, in some cases with some of these candidates, continue talking about it, and I think they're going to lose. So looking ahead at 2024, again, we talked about this in a video a few weeks ago when I talked about the fact that the math was very tough for Donald Trump, and I did promise to make a follow-up with all 6 of these states going into the math, which makes it so difficult for Republicans. But this map really just highlights the fact that this is really where the election is going to be decided. I could say safely pretty much with Donald Trump on the ballot that Georgia and Arizona are off the table. I think both of those states will go to the Democrats if Donald Trump is the nominee. Donald Trump is incredibly unpopular in Maricopa County, Arizona, the suburbs, and of course the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, which saw just gigantic swings to the left from 2016 to 2020. And I really don't see that stopping. These areas are changing very rapidly demographically. And, part of this is a demographics issue, and maybe I'll talk more about that in other videos, because I mostly talk about the negative impact Trump has on the suburbs, but it isn't the only reason the suburbs are trending left. The other reason is changing demographics, whether that be by race or educational attainment, income, things like that. Demographics do change. Obviously, the population's living in an area, and that, of course, is going to change the political bent of the area. And in the Atlanta Metro's case, that has been heavily favorable to Democrats. Same thing with Arizona, Maricopa County, trended 5 points left. That was enough, of course, to swing the entire state, even as some of the more rural counties trended more towards the right. So, you take 2 states off the table, that really leaves Nevada, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. North Carolina is, of course, the most friendly swing state to Donald Trump. Let's just say, for argument's sake, he wins that state. He's at 235. Pennsylvania, we've only seen trend more left since 2020. In fact, the PA GOP really had sort of a collapse in the state with independent voters, and I want to talk about that probably in tomorrow's video. We'll take a look at that. But that's a state that I think is probably going to be very difficult for Donald Trump or any Republican to win. That really leaves Wisconsin and Nevada, which I think are, outside of these other states, probably the most friendly to the GOP. Wisconsin potentially in the Democratic column. Maybe you give Nevada to Republicans, but I really don't see Republicans expanding the map. You either have the same map as 2020, or you have a worser case for the GOP where they lose the state of North Carolina, and potentially, and this of course would be in an extreme worst case, potentially even the state of Texas, which we'll talk about in another video. I don't think that's as likely as of right now, but I don't think it's impossible, and I think that's something the GOP should certainly be worried about. So, looking ahead to 2024, it's going to be a very tough climb for the GOP. Again, Donald Trump is extremely unpopular. He's unpopular in these swing states. He's unpopular with every single demographic in the country, besides white working class, white blue collar voters. Every other demographic, including white college educated, he's underwater. Joe Biden's also underwater with these voters, but you have to keep in mind some of these voters are left-wing voters that think that Joe Biden just hasn't done enough. And just because somebody is unpopular doesn't mean they won't win. Donald Trump was... Just because somebody's unpopular doesn't mean they won't win. Donald Trump was incredibly unpopular in 2016 and he was able to beat Hillary Clinton. But of course, we're talking about a different scenario where Donald Trump has sort of been in the political wilderness for 4 years. He really hasn't had any major victories. Most of his candidates have gone on to defeat since he's been out of office. And I think that trend of defeat for the Republican Party is probably going to continue in 2024. And it's certainly a shame for Republicans since the stakes are so high in the next election, but it looks like they're on track to lose the House, probably stay locked out of the Senate potentially. We'll talk about that in a future video, and of course lose the presidency. So anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.